Welcome. Welcome to Acts of Magis. This is one way the Loyola Schools tries to celebrate grace. Grace, even in the face of adversity. I'd like to thank the Loyola Schools faculty members who are going to do their presentations. They are commendable in their own excellence, expertise, and passion for the common good. I'd also like to thank the University Research Council and the Ateneo Research Institute of Science and Engineering for collaborating in organizing this event. So welcome again. Go with hope and courage.
Dr. Norman Dennis Marquez, or Shaw to his colleagues, and Doc Shaw to his students, has served Ateneo de Manila University for 25 years. He led the Health Sciences program as its director for 10 years and has nurtured and guided health sciences students to be more and to do more. He is not only a mentor to his students, but he has also become a father to them. He is currently the university physician who looks after our wellness and safety. But even before he was appointed as university physician and until now, many of his peers and colleagues seek counsel from him not only for their physical ailment, but also for his words of wisdom and for healing of the soul. Shaw is also best known for his commitment to service. He is one of the pioneers of service learning in the university, and he is also an integral part of the Ateneo Dream Team. His experiences in community engagement have been useful in his role as a coordinator of learning experiences in communities for Ateneo School of Medicine and Public Health. He may draw inspiration from Jose Rizal and St. Ignatius of Loyola, but he has become a source of inspiration and role models to his peers, colleagues, and students. Many from the Tulong Dunong family fondly remember him for his generous heart. It is only fitting that he is today's speaker for Acts of Magis. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all listen to Dr. Norman Dennis Marquez on his Acts of Magis.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the eighth session of Acts of Magis, Ateneans in the Service of Society. As you had heard, we are lucky to have with us this afternoon Dr. Norman Marquez, also known as Doc Shaw. All right. So in a way, this is Shaw time, no? As many of us would jokingly say. Doc Shaw, good afternoon. Kumusta po kayo?
Good afternoon, Chris. Good afternoon, everyone.
All right. Kumusta kayo, Doc?
Humihinga pa naman.
And that's a good sign, di po ba?
I suppose, yes.
Yes, that's a good sign. So we have with us Doc Show this afternoon, and of course, we're looking forward to what he will be sharing with us. But before we go to that, we'd like to thank, of course, the University Research Council and the Ateneo Research Institute for Science and Engineering for putting together Acts of Magis. All right. We are coming to you live on two platforms. A group of us are in a G Meet, all right, where those who are in the G Meet may later on during the Q&A post your questions or comments. But we're also we are streaming live, on the Ateneo FB account, where also you may put in some of your questions, and we will be picking up those questions, and we'll be sharing it with Doc Shaw later on during the Q&A. We'd like to request everyone, especially those in the G Meet, to please keep your microphones on mute, and if you may also turn off your cameras for the duration of the program. So, Doc Shaw, thank you very much again for being with us. I'll turn the floor to you now.
All right. If I had been a bit more techy, I would probably start with a question, or rather a request for people to tick the frame or the image that does not represent a building. Unfortunately, I'm not techie. But the other point I'd like to make is that much of what I'm going to talk about today is not really so new. In fact, most of this we would have prayed to be what should be the normal. Okay? Today we will be talking more, or we will be talking about health. And as officially defined by the WHO, health is not simply the absence of disease, but the totality of the physical, intellectual, psychosocial, and spiritual well-being. To some extent, therefore, this is how an individual or a group is able to realize aspirations, satisfy needs, and change or cope with the environment. Clearly, health is a resource for everyday life. So that when people talk about wanting to be healthy, health there should not be the end goal, but rather a means to a more specific goal. Now, this definition since 1984 is really revolutionary because it has deviated from the old paradigm where health has been attributed or equated to simply the absence of disease. Disease defined as an occurrence where a disease agent becomes, or we are exposed to a disease agent, our body responds or will respond to that agent, and whether we have the ability to overcome the agent or not, we will get better or not. And if not, then hopefully there is an available treatment that can help us recover. With this new definition or the new health model or the health paradigm, we now realize that health is more than just genetics, more than just biology, because now we see the interplay and the impact of the environment, behaviors, social and societal characteristics, even health services or medical care. And we see this interplay as operating in an increasingly complex and rapidly changing landscape. Just this year, there has been a tremendous change in the way not just the country, but the rest of the world has been behaving. We realized that there is a major shift, or rather, more actions are highlighted as we cope with the pandemic. No? And we'll talk about that in a while. But definitely, we realize it's clear that health or the or building health is extends into the other sectors, the influence that will eventually influence opportunities and outcomes. So we go to that question in the title, no? How do we build a more equitable system? Well, I think the first is to really understand our situation and define the problem. We can use a framework to do this. And this is what we call the social determinants of health framework. Simply, these are factors, circumstances, and resources that we encounter in our day-to-day life that will have impact on our health as a whole. No? And that includes structural determinants. No? These are the foundations of society, how we have defined our political system, our economic system, even our social and cultural system, where we define the values that we uphold, as well as the social norms that we observe. These structural determinants will give rise to what we call socio-economic positions, or simply the position of power by which we will manage and use as we deal with the rest of society. Now, these positions of power or socioeconomic position can be are measured in terms of our education, occupation, income, even gender and ethnicity. What is clearly observable and what has been very evident is that in all societies, the distribution of this power is uneven. And these inequities will manifest and translate into what we call different exposures and vulnerabilities. But what is important to understand is that distribution is very systemic. So how do we encounter those vulnerabilities and exposures? No? It is through the differential or the differences in terms of material circumstances, social cohesion, psychosocial factors, behaviors, as well as biological factors, including what we call our health system. And these are what we call our intermediary factors. Simply put, the intermediary determinants or intermediary factors are pathways from the root causes, the structural determinants that we have just discussed, and leading up to the observed inequities in health that will shape the outcomes and opportunities. Now, let's take an example. If you talk about gender inequality, for instance, clearly, in a myriad ways, this will impact certain or will create vulnerabilities because of the discriminatory feeding patterns, the lack of decision-making power, the unfair divisions of work, or even leisure, as well as limited possibilities of improving one's life, including access to healthcare services. Even in this modern age, in many still tribes in Africa and Asia, and even in some communities in the country, we still see this uneven distribution of power among males and females. So, and one of the more pressing impact would be what we call gender-based violence, which can either have a sexual nature or simply a physical violence, particularly perpetuated by either intimate and even non-intimate partners alike. You know? Now, this gender-based violence reflects and reinforces inequality between men and women, compromising the health, the dignity, and the security, and even the autonomy of the survivor. Now, the caveat is, if we look again at the social determinants framework, there is sometimes a tendency to look at this with some form of reductionism. How is that? No? Sometimes we tend to simplify, in fact, oversimplify the causality of certain health conditions, so that poverty as a whole in general is usually construed as the reason for one being unhealthy. While that might be true, there are more complex interactions that will have to come together that will result or that will eventually result to one's poor health, as we will see later on. No? The other loophole or the other thing that we need to be aware of is that using the framework, sometimes we tend to fragment the conditions and again, oversimplify the effect of one over the other, so that we fail to see the complexity of our life. No? We fail to see the more complex interactions that come together to produce a whole person, to produce an entire experience. In the same way, if we look at the framework again, it can create a certain layering effect or an externalization, so that the health system will look at social factors or structural determinants as being outside of itself. What will that, or how will that impact the delivery of services? No? So that once diagnosed that the cause or possible cause of one's blindness is because of inadequate nutrition due to lack of source of income, then healthcare professionals can simply dismiss the problem as not their own. What we probably should do is to use the framework as a means to better understand the complexity of life, particularly how these interactions can define, as mentioned, our health status. So again, from a science of control, we move to a science of understanding. What are the various factors and how these factors affect each other in order to result in order to that will eventually define which one or how we are going to be healthy or not. So how do we build this equitable system? If you think, the truth is, from many studies, we have already measured, you know, most of the impact really will come from what we call the social or the societal characteristics or the total ecology, the context of one's life, where and what time a person, at what era a person is born, the prevailing customs and traditions, the existing laws at the time, how society values different or education or wealth or even justice, will have a very, very strong impact in the outcome of that person's life. Okay? Interestingly, if you look at the impact of genes and biology as well as medical care, they represent less than half in terms of contributing to that impact. And yet, in terms of the utilization of resources, most societies will try to put a lot on those. No? There is this that now becomes there's a gap then that we will need to address. Looking at this health impact pyramid, okay, interventions then would mean on your right side, you will realize that the more or the more individualized effort will be needed as we go up that pyramid, but the public health impact or the general impact in the, will also be moving on the opposite direction. If we're going to therefore institute programs and reforms that will address more of the social factors, it is clear then that we are going to help more people, and at the same time, we are going to have maximum effect for our resources. Still, the question, how do we keep improving? How do we translate all of this into our own participation, our own individual participation? Again, look at the framework and we realize that the healthcare system becomes a very integral equalizer. No? The gaps or the different socioeconomic positions may actually be created by a system that is more sensitive, that is more responsive to the different needs of the individual, but at the same time of the larger population. This health system consists of what we call building blocks. Building blocks, there are 6 building blocks: human resources and financing. Those are some your investments, major investments. Medical products, vaccines, technologies, and service delivery are the services that we provide. And then you have governance, leadership, and including information system that will cut across through all those building blocks and will try to regulate and make sure that all of the factors will come or will fall into the right places. No? I will discuss this in another forum actually. So maybe because of interest of time, I will just try to focus on some points here. No? An equitable health system today is construed as or is could be seen in the efforts towards what we call universal health care, where we ensure that all people will have equitable access to promotive, preventive, curative, as well as rehabilitative health services of sufficient quality to be effective without exposing the user to financial hardship. Now, so what does that mean? If we want to make sure that the system will help as many, as often, and as much, then we have to build or create a system where its financing capability will be adequate to ensure that the needed services will be provided, but at the same time, people will be protected from financial catastrophe or improvements associated with having to, or rather impoverishment associated with having to pay for them. No? A well-functioning health system ensures equitable access to essential medical products, vaccines, and technologies of assured quality, safety, efficacy, and cost-effectiveness, and their scientifically sound and cost-effective use. In the same way, the services that we provide should be delivered in an effective way, a safe way, where quality personal as well as non-personal interventions will be provided when and where they are needed with minimum waste of resources. Information system is one that ensures the production, analysis, dissemination, and the use of reliable and timely information on health determinants, the health system performance, and health status. In other words, this is the research that we do and the information on how we are able to organize those information so that we can use them to improve our services and have a more rational utilization of these resources. Now, just a word probably on the workforce, because after all, the system will not work by itself. Rather, the delivery will have to be dependent on the people running the programs and overseeing the systems. When we speak of the health workforce, we are talking not only of the doctors, the nurses, or the dentists, or even the midwives, but all the other support teams, including barangay health workers, clinic managers, emergency medical teams, ambulance drivers, including pharmaceuticals, health insurance, etc. So practically everyone in society must or will be directly or indirectly part of this health system. A more equitable one would mean that we should ensure that our workforce are competent, responsive, fair, efficient, sufficient, and fairly distributed. During this pandemic, it is clearly seen that there is this big gap, no? But even before, we already knew that the distribution of healthcare workers is very uneven. You have many in the cities and urban areas, and very, very few in the rural areas, especially in the what we call the geographically isolated areas, no? So hopefully, we can address this by engaging more volunteers, or rather, by engaging more of these health professionals to venture in practicing these areas as well, no? But that also should be dependent, or rather, a big factor that can influence how your health workforce perform or will perform will be how leadership and governance is able to detect and correct undesirable trends. No? So, as in this pandemic, it's important to monitor, are we able to meet our objectives? Are we able to control the transmission given the interventions that we have instituted? Have we promoted health as a way of national development, so that health again should not be seen merely as an expenditure, but rather as an investment? As we mentioned a while ago, health is a resource. And if we are not able to build on these resources, then we will not have enough workforce that will drive the economy. We will not have healthcare workers that will take care of people when they get sick. But also, the leadership should be able to manage resources so that efficiency and effectiveness must come together, so that the resources will translate into reforms and into outcomes that are not only desirable but very timely and relevant. So, leadership and governance must therefore ensure strategic policy frameworks to make things sustainable and institutionalized, to have an effective oversight, which means to have a very good big picture, to forge coalition and alliances, no? To be able to regulate the different stockholders, or rather the different players, so that they can deliver their jobs well. And then to be particular with systems design, as we mentioned, no, the social determinants framework has given us a sense that many of those social factors will impact the well-being of a person and of communities. So the design must again be very sensitive and responsive as well. And then the accountability. Leadership must be accountable not only in terms of the use of resources, but also in terms of how decisions are made and for what purpose those decisions are made. Question has not really yet been answered. I think each one of us rather should take on this mission. we cannot just rely on government to build an equitable system. And as each one of us takes on this mission, it's important to understand that we do this not because we feel like it, not because we feel good about doing it, but rather the challenge in engaging and being part of engaging society and being part of this mission is really to understand how well we can do things, how right or what good will be the things that we will do, and how often and how far we can go. So that mission will entail competence, character, and commitment in each one of us. By competence, we're talking about effectiveness. Are we achieving our goals? In terms of character, we're talking about our personal morals or ethics. Are we always acting with integrity and authenticity? And then the commitment. Are we willing to take part and to serve our people? Are we ready to take on all of these challenges, not only when we are well, not only when we feel like it, but rather anytime there is a call, anytime that we have to respond swiftly and decisively. So, again, to build the system, each of one, particularly the health workers, will have to do things well, to do good things for the common good, and to always be generous. Walang pag, um, walang pag-aalinlangan, at higit sa lahat, walang hinihiling na kapalit. Now, we realize that this might be a very daunting task, no? Especially during now, I mean, this pandemic, we've seen many people who have contributed much, even when people were not expecting them to participate or to offer their services. And that's why it's important to realize that the only way we can build the system is with companionship. We have a very good Filipino term for this, kaagapay, no? So we cannot do this alone. We need to be able to work with people. We need to be able to assign groups with their own expertise and to be able to use those expertise and support those expertise. And for some of us, we will have to take supporting roles. Okay lang yon, no? If we think, wala akong alam, hindi ko kaya yan. I think the important thing now is to give your share in the best way you can for the best possible outcomes. And when all will have been done and all would have been said and tried, I think to be able to build a system, we need our biggest companion, and that is God. We've seen in many efforts from within the university alone, no? Where people have been donating goods, contributing to the making of PPEs, trying to provide psychosocial support, trying to take care of students, trying to support health institutions, taking care of communities who have been neglected by either the local or the national government. Many efforts have been done by the university, by different sectors of the university, students, faculty, administrators, alumni, friends. And so, to sum it up, we need to come together and pray to make all of this work, to make all of these efforts meaningful, to make sure that what we know will translate to, to actions and interventions that are not only effective, but also relevant, and to always be reminded that all these things that we do is for God's greater glory. So I will end with that prayer and hope that in each one of us, we will carry out this mission for the greater glory of God. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doc Shaw. Alright. At this point of the program, typically people would be applauding, and I'm sure they are in their hearts. So, but for now, we'll just give you acts of Magis hearts. Okay, para sa inyo po ito, Doc. All right, thank you for that, Doc Shaw. Um, there were technical parts to it, but at the same time, no, there were a lot of things to reflect on. No? And one of the things that I remembered that I of course got from you initially was that you don't have to be a doctor per se, or a health worker per se to contribute to public health. Tama po
Yeah.
ba, Doc?
Yes. Health is really a responsibility of everyone. No? So
Mm,
we always think of health as the responsibility of doctors and health professionals, but um, with everyone, the entire of society should take part in making sure that this resource becomes an integral component of our life.
yes. And then there were, well, to the audience, so I hope you don't mind, because Doc, I occasionally bother Doc Shaw in his office, and or when we meet each other in the hallways, we talk about these things. You also mentioned about the upstream and downstream effects, no, of public health, all right, and how we should be mindful, especially that we tend to be in the upstream, and what we do will affect the downstream. Correct,
Yes.
Doc?
Yes. I think that's where the social determinants of will actually help us, no? From the upstream, we can see that many of the root causes, the interplay of these root causes will have those outcomes downstream, no? So the very foundations of society, um, uh, how we value things, how we are able to um, promote justice, how we're able to make sure that everyone will have an equitable chance to improve his or her life. Those are defined already by the structural determinants. And unless, therefore, we address those determinants at the root cause, we will always be running out of resources because just cannot sustainably keep correcting things at the bottom of the downstream. We need to be able to prevent as much of the problems as we can. And if we cannot prevent them, at least be able to mitigate all of them, mitigate most of them. And part of that mitigation is still trying, is also, it will involve reforming the structural determinants and addressing the gaps in the intermediary factors.
Thank you, Doc Shaw. We'll now get some questions now. So again, to the audience in the G Meet, you may post your questions on the chat. but we're also getting some questions from the FB live streams. So here's one, Doc. So how can we move from the science of control to science of understanding?
Okay, maybe just to elaborate a bit more, no, what I mean by a science of control is we've always, I mean, for the longest time, we look at health from a very strong scientific perspective. No, that is not wrong. In fact, we do need the understanding, or rather we need the tools of science to allow us to appreciate for more completely, more deeply how disease processes work. No? We need the tools of science and technology to come up with better diagnostics, with better treatment modalities, no? At least as far as pharmaceutical treatments are concerned. However, to see healthcare simply as um, the result of all of this, or rather to depend solely on the scientific tools to control the causative agents that will directly cause, or that will directly create the illness, it is also equally important to realize that beyond the causative agent and beyond how our body's immune systems will react, there is a larger environment that will also either predispose us or protect us from these causative agents. No, how we are able to manage our wastes, how we are able to provide healthy and nutritious foods on the table, how we are better to take care or to make sure that our workers are in a safe environment, um, to be able to prevent yung sinabi natin, no, catastrophe, financial catastrophe after a hospitalization, how to provide vaccines, how to make sure that everyone will have quality education that will allow them better decision making. Those are the larger factors that can prevent many of these illnesses or diseases in general. In the same way, you know, the what we call these accidents, whether vehicular accidents or even violence, these are also diseases to some extent, no? But um, the health system usually the health system usually does not pay too much attention on these things. Why? Because we don't most training of health professionals do not include that in their studies, and hopefully it now becomes a real trend in medical education to fully appreciate health in a larger context, in a more in a bigger field, beyond simply the science. The understanding, therefore, will not necessarily provide all solutions, but becomes the first step in looking for those solutions. To see the big picture, to have that science of understanding will allow us to not only contextualize the different problems, but it will also provide multi-disciplines and make available multi-sectors to take part in looking for the right interventions. So rather than using simply science to define things, and particularly health, we engage a larger and a broader understanding to see all of these factors and be able to um, look for possible collaborations as well.
Thank you, Doc. Thank you for expounding on that. It gives, I guess, a whole new meaning to the term holistic medicine, uh, or holistic health at that. Um,
Actually, Chris, that's kind of redundant when we talk about holistic health because health, as we've seen in the framework, should be seen
holistic.
holistic.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Doc. So now, we'll get some more questions here, and I guess these tend to be now along the more social aspects of these. I'll share with you two questions, which I'll put together. The first one is maybe how do we start really building a more equitable healthcare system in the country? And secondly, is the Philippines actually ready for a university as universal? Sorry, is the Philippines ready for a universal healthcare
As,
system?
yes, yes. As I've mentioned, no, probably it's important first for us to appreciate the big picture, okay? And it's important, therefore, for our leadership, both in the health sector and in the non-health sector, to see how these factors come into play. No? So, in other words, for instance, many politicians and government officials still look at health as big expenditures, not realizing that these expenditures, if done correctly, are in fact investments in people who will be your productive workforce. And by productive, not only because they're healthy physically, but also healthy mentally. No? So I think that becomes now the direction, so that there is this movement, or this movement by the WHO. There's advocacy by the WHO that every public policy must somehow have a health angle to it. In fact, the SDGs represent such a mindset. No, if you look at the SDGs, most of these SDGs really talk about policies that will have direct or indirect impact on health. So, are we ready to do that? I think there are many health professionals who are into it already. We just need to have better institutional support for it. As I've said, both local and national government must realize that investing in health is really investing in national development. And if we, given for instance this pandemic, no, we in fact most of the things that we need to address now will have to deal with those health issues issues that have been there even before the pandemic. The migration of your health professionals, the uneven distribution of the workforce between rural and urban areas, the uneven pay between government employees and health professionals and those in the private sector. Of course, we talk about the availability and the cost of medicines and vaccines. We have been trying to address these problems and these issues for the longest time, but I think the problem is sustainability, because leadership has not been able to sustain those efforts, because for the most part we've seen health in a very fragmented and a very in a very fragmented and a very reductionist way, no, as I mentioned in a while ago.
Thank you, Doc. Thank you. Um, maybe just as a closing, right? Or as we proceed towards closing, um, how can, well, clearly this has been your advocacy, I know, no, on a personal level as well as on a professional level, and Ateneo as an institution has invested in this cause, as we have our ASMPH, no, and you're very much part of that. How can we, I guess, have others and join? in this advocacy, of public health?
Um, you know, in every forum that I get invited, I would always try to find a way to squeeze this in, no? But I think public health has been rather people have not been updated with what real public health is about, no? People talk about public health as um, walang pera dyan. People talk about public health as well, is that really science? Is that really um, going, is that really effective? Most of public health interventions will have their impact in the mid, will take some time, no? Will really take some time to feel the impact. And that's why people don't seem um, to value it so much when we get too impatient for results, no? But probably one way to get people right now is probably the best time to push for public health reforms. Clearly, this pandemic can only be addressed by better appreciation of what public health is about. How we are able to interact with people in terms of personal hygiene, how we are able to keep ourselves healthy by partaking only nutritious foods, how we are able to um, have the necessity for access to clean water. Ngayon, napakahalaga, no? Yung paghuhugas ng kamay. So, in other words, the measures, the cornerstone of interventions right now that have been found to be effective all over the world, clearly, these are all public health measures. These are all public health interventions. And they're very simple. They're very cheap, in fact, no? It's just that we need to be able to standardize them well, again, using the different disciplines, allowing more people to participate, the communication experts, the marketing experts, the yeah, even the the psychology experts, all of these people, no, you have your technology experts, those that can design and produce effective and cheap PPEs. We talk about craftsmanship, no, designing our own, let's say, hazmats, designing our. You see the market now, natutuwa ka, ang daming iba-ibang variation ng mga mask na lang, no? The artistry and the craftsmanship of people, we can all capitalize on this and contribute piecemeal, no? In one forum, sabi ko nga, how do you build a system brick by brick? Each one bringing his or her own brick until we're able to build something that is strong, something that is beautiful, something that is effective and relevant, something that will last and can be sustained.
Thank you very much, Doc Sean. And I guess the title of your talk actually captures that sentiment. Na it's not so much a new normal, it's maybe what should have been in the first place, to that extent. And we are thankful that, and I'll borrow your term, that you are one of those kasama, kaagapay, sabi niyo nga po. Salamat po sa pagiging kaagapay natin dito sa journey na ito of public health. And together with the audience of Acts of Magis and our friends in the chat, we thank you for spending time with us this afternoon. If our audience would want to get in touch with you, Doc, saan ka ba namin makakagila? Pwede pa ba? Punong-puno na eh.
Tabi-tabi na.
Tabi-tabi na.
Well, you can email me at if there are specific concerns, then people can email me at nmarquez@ateneo.edu. Although
Okay.
that's kind of full already. The alternative univphysician@ateneo.edu. Um, they can see me going around campus practically every day because I still have to do work on site as well as online. Um, People who know me, you can approach them. They will point you to me. So,
Yeah.
sabi nga natin, part of this is really to be available, and hopefully all of us will be available for everyone for the greater good.
Yeah. And thank you again very much for that note, Doc Shaw. For me, I guess the invitation for all of us to make ourselves available in ways which we can make ourselves available is really no different from how Christ had made himself available to us. And so, to our audience, thank you also for joining us this afternoon. All the episodes of Acts of Magis may be found in the artium.ateneo.edu and, of course, on the Ateneo Facebook page as well as Ateneo website. And with that, please do join us again next week for another session of Acts of Magis. My name is Chris Castillo. Thank you for joining us.